morning, sunshines. Today, we're going to talk about color. Yay. Color is something that is very personal to people. It can be very subjective. And of course, as a designer, you get to make your choices. Often they should be made on character-driven decisions. Obviously, plot decisions help sometimes. There's research that can influence the color choices that you make, all those sort of things. But before we get to those aspects of things, I just want to spend a little time trying to get you to understand what exactly color is and why particularly it may have such an impact on us. First of all, color, and I'm not trying to scare you with this sentence, but color is the quickest way to get to quantum physics. I'm not trying to make a physicist out of you, but color is one of those things that depends on light. And light is one of those things where our good friend Einstein developed his theory of relativity based upon the speed of light, which is the fastest thing in the universe. And so because of that, there's a lot about color that depends upon lighting. Again, I'm not trying to make lighting designers out of you. I'm not trying to, but understanding color, you sort of have to understand a little bit about these aspects of it. First of all, there are three aspects of color. You have the light as it comes out of the source. You have the light as it reflects off a material, and then you have the light that your eye sees. And each one of those aspects can change or alter what the color is and how it's affected. And so again, just because you may have made a color choice, for instance, in the color of the wall, if a light designer comes on and bathes your wall in red, suddenly your wall is no longer the color you chose it to be, unless of course you chose it to be red for some reason. And here's a big caveat, Val will tell you this as well. Don't put anything red on stage. Red is a very glaring color, unless it's the lead character and you want to look at it. But red catches the eye, and so there's a big lesson. If you don't listen to the rest of this video, listen to that part. Red should be used sparingly and with a great deal of purpose. The rest of the colors you can get away with however you use them. First of all, let's just talk about light from the source. We'll break down each one of these individually. Light from a source depends upon what the source is, and it's on a spectrum. Gamma rays, X-rays, television rays, radio waves are all the same type of thing as the visible spectrum. They're all on different wavelengths and wave frequencies. The wave length is how far up and down the wave travels, and the wave frequency is how quickly it does that. Gamma rays, again, the sun produces all of these things with it when you have the combustion of the sun with the hydrogen breaking down, which creates light rays from the sun or from a star. So the star creates all of those things. Gamma rays, again, are radiation that's poison to us, and so fortunately we have this layer of oxygen in the atmosphere that keeps those gamma rays from hitting us on Earth, which is why when they're talking about the ozone layer, people are scared, because the ozone layer is what protects us humans and other creatures from the radiation of gamma rays. But going down through the visible spectrum, going down through radio waves, through television rays, you also have X-rays in there. All these are different types of physical anomalies that have different patterns of both light is both a wave and a projectile. Again, not to get too much into the quantum physics of it, but light rays can pass through things, they can also pass around things. And so there's a great deal of discussion about exactly what the nature of light is. But once you get to understand that light is a part of the spectrum, the slower the wavelengths are in the visible spectrum, you have the red colors. And the colors that are just slower than red are what we call infrared, right? And there are some creatures, dogs, that can see infrared colors. So they see colors beyond what we can see. And then you go up through the spectrum, orange a little bit quicker, a little bit faster wavelengths, a little faster frequency, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. If you look at the spectrum that I've given you on your handout, your notes, you can see that it's reversed on the notes. But Roy G. Biv is what we call that. Those are the physical spectrum of light. Again, red being the slowest of the visible light. And then we get to violet being the quickest of the visible light, and just beyond violet is ultraviolet. Again, there are some creatures, bats, who can see ultraviolet waves. We used to think that bats couldn't see, but what they see is just a different spectrum than what we see. They see ultraviolet rays, which again, in the very dark, is very helpful. And again, you can buy cameras that can see ultraviolet and infrared, and a lot of theaters have those so that you can see in the dark and all that sort of stuff to go around what that is. Anyway, that is the property of projected light. Yes? Now, the primary colors in projected light are red, blue, and green. Yes? And it's a combination of those three colors that give you your secondary colors and your tertiary colors. Now, for instance, let's just talk about the definitions real quick. Hue, the word hue, H-U-E, is the basic color that a thing is. So for instance, I have this very exciting brown shirt on. There's an orange tag on that tripod. The walls are white. The fire alarm is red. It's the basic generic color of the thing. It's called its hue. Once you have taken the hue and altered it slightly, you can do three basic things to color, to hue. One is to add black to the color, one is to add white to the color, and one is to add gray to the color. So if you add white to any hue, you have tinted the color. If you add gray to any hue, you have toned the color. And if you add black to a color, you have shaded the color. This is especially important when you're scenic painting and you're trying to find the highlights and the shadows of a piece. So you take the basic color of the object and then you mix it with white for the highlights, you mix it with black for the shadows. And again, the thing about gray is that there are gradations of gray. You have light and dark grays, but any gray added to the mixture of the hue is still toning the object down. Let's just talk physically though how light transfers from projected to reflected light. When light is projected from a source, it has all the colors that are possible from that source. So for instance, the sun is the gamma rays, the X-rays, everything. It's all projected from the sun. Roy G. Biv, the whole thing. The light that I'm standing on right now is a fluorescent tube, and the way that light is rated in projected light, so that we don't talk colors in generic terms like hues, you need specific detailed information about the color. And so what they did, this makes no sense, I don't know why anybody would do this, but they took a piece of black pig iron and they stuck it in an oven and they turned the heat up on the oven. And as if you've ever had a stove, you know that when you turn the stove on, it gets a little red, and then if it gets really hot, it turns orange, and if it gets really, really hot, it turns yellow, and then it melts. Well, pig iron doesn't melt. And so what they would do is they would take a color temperature of each color and give it that basically assigned to how a piece of pig iron looks under that much heat. So the sun is basically 6,500 to 7,000 degrees Kelvin. The light that's coming off of this fluorescent tube is what's called 5,400 degrees Kelvin. It's a green light. I don't know if you've ever taken a camera and not adjusted for white, a video camera, or if you have an old school camera that has outdoor film and you're taking an indoor picture, it's very green tinted, or if you're taking an indoor camera and take an outdoor camera, it's very blue outside and it's very yellow and incandescent light. Incandescent light, which is the other colored light that we use for projected light theater, burns at about 3,200 degrees Kelvin. It's very yellow. And so, first of all, you can only have the colors that are projected from the source. So one of the things about this ultraviolet light that I'm standing under with this UV ray thing that is this fluorescent tube, the higher end lights, the blues and the violets, are a lot less than they are in the sunlight. And so it's going to affect the color of the walls. Again, one of the things about your physical eye is that you're going to, a human being color adjusts better than anything. When you walk into an environment, your eye immediately sees the difference and finds something and white adjusts very easily. Cody, do you mind go over there and turn the lights off just so you can see how my shirt actually changes color? I assume this will work, who knows? But when you turn the lights off, go ahead. Even though my shirt has not physically changed properties, it is a different color now than it would be if you turn the light back on, and it's now a brighter color because I have now had more light energy hit my shirt, if that makes any sense. Yes, it is still the same color, but to the eye, it's a different color because it has basically you've tinted it and toned it. You've turned more white onto it, and you put more black into it. And so one of the things as a scenic designer, You need to understand how a lighting designer works so you can work in coordination with each other, because you both need to understand what the desired effect of the light is. And for instance, if you're doing Dracula and there's a scene where suddenly he's sucking the blood out of somebody, and the lighting designer is going to make everything red on stage because it's very dramatic or whatever. As a set designer, you need to understand that whatever color you choose to make that set under red light is going to change the color of it, and so you need to have prepared for that. It can be texture, it can be spatter, it can be some sort of other way that you texture the set that will accept the red light in a positive way, rather than just falling back and everything turning into brown or mush or whatever, some other color. Oh, that's the color of my shirt. Anyway, the way light works, you have the projected source, which gives you the Roy G biv that you have. Again, it may only be Roy GB or it may only be Roy G in the case of incandescent bulb. But you have the light source coming from, the energy coming from the source, and when it strikes an object, and again, 95% of what we see is reflected light. It is light that has passed through or been reflected by another object. We see very little source light. Matter of fact, if you look at the sun in your eyes, your retinas will burn. So most of what we see is this reflected, I'm gonna call it pigmentation, because what happens in the process of striking the atoms, the molecules that are in my shirt absorbs a certain amount of energy from the light ray, and the energy it absorbs, it uses to make the electrons jump shells. Now, let's talk again. This gets into molecular theory. We're getting into physics, I apologize. But the way an atom is made, you have the nucleus, which has the protons and neutrons, and then you have these little things called electrons, which circle around in various shells. Each shell has a certain number of electrons that can be allowed in the shell. So the inner shell, for instance, can have 2 electrons. That's it. Once you add a third electron, it creates a second shell. The second shell can have 6 electrons. That's it. Once you have a 7th electron, you get another shell. Each shell can contain a different number of those electrons. And the way the molecules work is you have 2 basic elements that have joined together and share electrons in the outer shell. The outer shell is what's called the valence shell. And the larger the atom, the more willing most atoms are at sharing their valence shells. So for instance, hydrogen only has 1 electron, and hydrogen really likes to have its electron. But if you have 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, they create a bond together that creates what we call water, H2O. And so they are very happy to share that little outer electron with each other. The only way to get water to separate is through supply electricity to it, and you can separate the hydrogen from the oxygen. I don't know if you've ever done that experiment in college in your physics class or your chemistry class. But if you add electrons or add electrical current to just a glass of water, and you have 2 receptacles, the receptacle for oxygen will fill up half the speed of the receptacle for hydrogen. So that's a fun little experiment. But that's the way molecules work. That outer valence shell is an electron which is sort of free out there in the universe. It likes being where it is. It sort of, gets to see mom and dad occasionally, but it's off to college. And so if a ray of a light comes along and excites it, it'll jump back and hide and quiver. And once it jumps back to the inner shell, then an electron has to jump back to the outer shell to maintain the balance of the shells. And that creates an energy that becomes the light that we see. Again, I'm not going to harp on this too much, but one is the receiving of the energy. That's the source to the material. I've received the energy. And now it's sort of like when you're an actor on stage. You're an actor, you're doing your part, and if the audience is with you, you get really excited and your performance gets a little brighter. When you have a poor reaction from the audience, you're a little duller. And one of the things, for instance, let's talk about blue jeans. Over time, blue jeans tend to fade the more they're washed. The reason for that is because the electrons that have been individual to each molecule now get to the point where they've gotten all the free electrons have left. That's why your socks stick together in the wash, because they've received all those free electrons. And when you take the socks apart, there's little sparks that happen. If you just bought a new pair of jeans and you wash some socks with them, well, first of all, your socks will be blue now, thank you. But second of all, you have all these free electrons that are creating static electricity. And when you release those, then the electrons go into the universe and start finding things to join together with. And so and again, a lot of times you can feel it enter your body because there's a little electrical charge or something. It doesn't necessarily pop you or anything like that, but we've all had the static charge where you walk along carpet and then try to kiss them on the cheek or something. There's a little shock that happens. That's where those little free electrons, they sort of gather in the universe. You get enough of those things in the atmosphere and suddenly you have lightning strike, for instance. They're just out there. But these electrons in that valence shell moving back and forth within the shells, again, this is all theoretical. Nobody's ever seen this happen. But that's the way that people have explained the difference between the qualities of projected light and reflected light. The biggest difference between the two of them is that in projected light, the three primary colors, again, a primary color is a color you can't get by mixing anything else. You either have it or you don't. So that's a primary color. The primary colors in projected light are red, blue, and green. In reflected light and pigment, the primary colors are red, blue, and yellow. Yes, that's the biggest difference you need to know. Now, theoretically, when you blend true red, true yellow, and true blue together, you should achieve black. Now, my guess is in high school or somewhere, second grade, you did that. You blended blue, red, and yellow together. And what you get is this mucky brown color like my shirt. And the reason for that is because on Earth, there are things that are really close to what's called spectral yellow. Sulfur is really close to actual yellow. There's this red Alabama clay is actually really close to what's called spectral red. The problem is that the stuff that is spectral blue, or at least the closest we have on Earth, and again, it's a primary color. You can't get it from mixing anything else. But the closest you can get is this stuff called cobalt. Now, first of all, cobalt is very radioactive. Second of all, it's very expensive. And so to actually get that color blue is very difficult. And so you wind up with the blue that is close enough to spectral blue, but not really. And so this is where you get the problem, and ladies, you know this, guys, you've never heard of this, but that's where you get the problem that blacks are different colors. When you to achieve what we're going to call color black, you have to add more green or more purple or more blue to the mix, or less yellow or less red, in order to get the spectrum to shift from the brown, which it likes to be if it's a third, a third, a third, into the black area. Yes, and which is why when you take black and you put it into a colored light, for instance, if you have a black that is a blue black and you shine a blue light at it, it's no longer black, it's blue. If you take a black that is purple and you shine a blue light at it, it's no longer black, it's red, because the blue cancels out the blue that's in the purple, and what you see is the red. Same thing with green. If you have a green black, you shine a blue light at it, it's no longer no longer black, it is very greenish in color. And so one of the things you have to be very careful of as a lighting designer and as a set designer is that when you have black as a color on stage, you need to make sure you know what color black it is, because it may change markedly under different color lights. And especially if you have clothes that are not made of the same material and you think they're all black. If you have a black top and black pants and black shoes, when you turn the blue light on it, suddenly you may be wearing a green top, a red skirt, and some brown shoes. So again, be very careful of that. In projected light, if you take pure black, to attain a pure white light, you blend the three primaries together. Yes? And again, just as with black, you don't get a pure white, but because your eye can adjust and tell you it's white, it's not as obvious or as glaring. Yes? But in pigmentation, it's very obvious you haven't achieved a full black. Cool. Couple of other definitions. Hopefully I'm not going too fast for you. We're now into pigmentation. We've now reflected off of the object, and we're now talking about pigmented color. You have the hue. There's this thing called saturation. It is the relative amount of color in the hue. So for instance, my shirt being this very nice brown color, Lord knows what it's going to be on the video, but it is a very low saturation of brown because it's a very nice old shirt that's been worn and reworn many, many times, and so it's lost its luster. When you have very bright color, that's a high saturation of blue. Value is the relative brightness or darkness of the color. So when you have a very bright blue that shines and is brand new and all that sort of stuff, that's a high value, high saturation blue. Now, can you have a low saturation, high value? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's easier because value, depends upon the brightness of the color. And if you add white to the blue, it can become brighter. Now, for instance, this is just a side note. If you've ever noticed in a bright day, it is brighter on days that are partly cloudy than it is on days that have no clouds. And the reason for that is because the sun is a single source of light. And if it doesn't strike anything between you and your eye and the sun, it just is the light ray. It's bright, but it's not as bright as it is if there are clouds, little white things up in the sky, that the sun can also hit and then reflect into your eye. So you now have the source that is the light from the sun, and you have the reflected light from the clouds, which augment and make a partly cloudy day much brighter. Obviously, a fully cloudy day is much darker because you've blocked out the sun rays from your eyes. A little side note, but just things to notice. And again, as you're doing your design concept work, it is also brighter at the equator than it is towards the poles. So if you have a show that's happening in some sort of sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, the colors and the people that are there are more accustomed to seeing those bright colors. And you will also see that when you move north or south toward the poles, not only do the colors become less bright, they also become darker because they tend to be more colder climates during the year. And because color is receiving the heat from the light source, darker colors are warmer colors. Now again, wool is one of those things where the wool itself supplies the heat, and so even though wool typically is a lighter color, it'll provide more heat, but that's just because it's reflecting the color of the heat of your body. But if it's the same sort of material, the darker the color, the more heat it collects, because the more energy it's receiving from the light source. Again, in your notes, there's several examples of the colors that reflect off of the materials, how you get blue, how you get red, how you get magenta, how you get green, the colors that reflect, all that sort of stuff. I'll leave that to you for your understanding. The color mixing we talked about. Again, there's an example of how 3 light rays, one green, one red, one white, blend over each other. One green, one red, one blue, blend over each other to create the white light. But you can also see that the light between the green and the red is a nice yellow tint. Because in projected colors, if you ever want to do a little experiment, when you go to your computer screen or your television screen, if you just put a little drop of water on it, it'll magnify it, and you can see the little green dots, the little yellow dots, and the little green dots, red dots, and blue dots. Cool. Now, the other thing about color is that tints and tones can give you the sense that there is that the middle color is different. One of the handouts one of the examples that I've given you there's a little value dot that looks brighter with the blue surround and looks darker with the light surround. So colors not only have their own hue, but they also interact with each other to create the look. And it's, again, with the saturation, you can see that the blue stands out much easier with the red surround, the cranberry surround. And then when you have a blue surround around the blue, it's much harder to see. It stands out a lot less. So again, as you're designing your show, you want to make sure that where you want the focus to be has that contrast. Contrast is how you see, both light and dark. That's contrast. If everything's light, we've heard of white blindness, my guess is. If you've ever heard of snow blindness, when you walk out in the snow and everything's white, you can't see anything because there's no dark to compare it to. It's the same thing, and when the lights are all off and you walk into your house and there's no light on, because everything's black, it's hard to see. Now again, if it's your home, you know where things are because you've been around before, and hopefully you don't step on the Lego toys that people left you on the floor. But again, the way we see is contrast. That's what helps us. The next page I've given you there is the way things may change or alter under light. You can see how different the cube in the top first example changes shape, or looks yellowish in the first drawing, or the first picture, greenish under the blue light, and sort of almost disappears under the amber light. You can see the same blocks left and right, where the yellow block really becomes very green in the second phase, and in the third example there, you got the red blocks. The yellow block almost disappears completely in the red light. So again, one of the things you need to work with your lighting designer and your scene designer work hand in hand so you can understand what the audience is going to see as they're watching you play. All right, just color wheel. Simple color wheels, primary colors, red, blue, yellow, and we're talking about pigmentation, obviously. The secondary colors are when you take one part of each two of the primaries and mix them half and half. So if you mix blue and yellow, what do you get? Perfect. If you mix blue, red and the yellow, what do you get? Orange. Perfect. If you mix red and blue, what do you get? Perfect. So see, you did this all in second grade, you can understand it. So those are secondary colors. Now the tertiary colors are the colors in between. When you have two parts of one primary and one part of the other primary. So if you have a red, yellow, it's still a little orange in color, but that's a tertiary color, where you have two parts of one primary and one part of the other primary. That's called tertiary. A complementary color is the color directly across the color wheel. So for instance, red is across the color wheel straight from green. What did I say? What did I say? I don't know. And you can make an audience crave to see a color. Not only we'll talk about the psychological effects of color here in a second, but there's also a physiological effect of color. You can cause an audience, for instance, one of the things you could do is, well, let's look at it this way. I don't know, traditionally, barns are red, yes? The reason barns are red is because the farmer spends all day in a green field. Now, your economists will tell you that red paint is cheaper, and that's true. But the reason that red paint is cheaper is because that's the one farmers want to buy. So supply and demand. The demand is high, the supply is high, and so the cost is cheaper because that's what the farmer wants, because his eye has been seeing that color, and what it craves is the color that's opposite on the color wheel to balance out his eyes, his rods and his guns, which we'll talk about here in a second. The opposite is also true when you go to surgery. In a surgeon's hospital, the walls and the gowns in surgery rooms are all green because the doctor is spending so much time intently looking at red blood that when their eyes look up, they're craving to see green. Yes? And so as a set designer and lighting designer, you work hand in hand, you can cause the audience to crave to see a color. Now, I've already told you to be careful about using red to begin with, but just as an example, if you're doing Hello Dolly, and you have Dolly Levi about to appear on stage, what you can do to make the audience really, I don't care how good an actress she is, you can make the audience, when she walks on, have a big sigh of relief. Simply if you don't have anything on stage that's red for a good 30 minutes beforehand, if everything's green, it's called the Harmonia Gardens, so it makes perfect sense, but all the waiters are wearing green and all the fabrics and all the drapes are all green and everything's green on the set, and for a good 10, 20 minutes before Dolly Levi shows up, and then suddenly Dolly Levi appears at the top of the staircase in her bright red shiny dress, the audience will physiologically have a response saying, thank God, finally I get to look at something red. Now, of course, it helps if Dolly can sing a little bit, that's true. But you can help the audience or help the actor to have that anticipation by helping to change the color of those things. Again, one is costumes, one sets, so you coordinate these things, collaborate these things with your various designers as well. Cool. All right, physiologically, how do we see? The third part, you have the projected light. It has properties we talked about. You have the reflected light, has properties we talked about. The third, the opportunity to see color is physiologically in your own eye. We all know people that are colorblind. Those people just have something that may be a little out of sync. I've given you a copy there of what an eyeball looks like, theoretically. The biggest parts of it is, first of all, there's a lens that refracts anything that sees any light that passes through the eye, passes through the lens, and it reverses. So in your eyeball, you're actually seeing the reverse, the upside down image of what's actually out there in the world. Now your brain has become very accustomed to seeing things and putting it in the proper perspective. But in your eyeball, it is reversed. It's just like a camera. The camera sees the upside down version of what you see there. The inner wall of the retina is the back part of the eye, is lined with these things called rods and cones. Typically, a person has twice as many blue. First of all, it's projected light. So there are three primary colors, red, blue, and green. You have red cones, you have red rods, you have blue cones, red, blue rods, and green rods and blue, green cones. you have twice as many blue rods and cones physiologically. I'm going to suggest it's because we grew up in a world where the sky was blue. We should get very accustomed to seeing blue, and because of that, a lot of people, I'm not saying it's everybody's favorite color, but because your eye responds with so many rods and cones bursting when they see blue, if it may not be your favorite color, but most people like seeing blue because it has the energy that excites the eyeball. Yes? Now you, for personal reasons, may have other favorite colors because of past experiences. There are a lot of reasons why you have a favorite color. But blue tends to be, if not the favorite color, at least something people don't mind looking at. Earth tones, browns, greens, yellows, that sort of thing, things you look at, grass, sky, ground, that sort of stuff, tend to be comfortable colors as well. If you don't have a reason for a choice, a lot of times you just make a comfortable choice. It's like if you don't know where you're going to go for lunch or dinner, McDonald's is going to be sufficient, right? It's not anything you would choose to go eat, but if you just need something to get by, it supplies you energy and food for the moment. It's also cheap, right? And so barring any other decision source for decisions, earth tones are usually the best way to go. Things that are brightly colored tend to signify a little bit richer environment. And the reason for that is because in order to maintain brightness, it has to be new, it has to be fresh, it has to be, and because of that, it tends to be things that people have bought recently. And so people who have the money to buy things recently tend to wear bright, shiny colors. Now, the other thing about color, there's also these things called metallics. First of all, if you see a mirror reflection, true mirror reflection, it is the only thing where an object can receive a reflection and the properties don't change. If you see a projected light reflected on a mirror and the light has now hit your eye, it still has the same properties as projected light. The source hasn't changed the properties haven't changed from the source to the mirror. The mirror hasn't altered it at all. But again, that only occurs in mirrors. You can also, I'm sure you've seen tinted mirrors. You'd have golden colored mirrors and purple colored mirrors and all that sort of stuff. And those will add color and slightly alter the color temperatures of some of the colors in the spectrum. But if you've got a pure mirror reflection, that will not alter the properties of the reflected light, just so you know. Anyway, you also have red and green cones and rods that receive that information and send it to your brain. And again, any of those things can be out of line. Your lens over time, people sometimes gain weight in life, and that will alter the shape of your corneas. People often get older, and that can change the shape of your eyeballs. And so it may be that your 20/20 vision at an 18-year-old fails and becomes 20/40 by the time you're 80. Or it may improve because you maybe had a Coke bottle of glasses earlier. Obviously, there's techniques that you can come and they can do laser surgery where they can knock out some of and reshape the retina and all that sort of stuff. Today it's a miracle what they do with light. But again, one of the things I had a director that I worked with for a good 20 years before I realized they were colorblind. And I always wondered why they always wanted more red light on stage. And finally, we were doing a show and they turned on the light and he says, what color is that? Is that all right? And I was like, yes. He was like, well, I really can't see, I'm colorblind. I was like, you mean I've been working with you for 20 years? And I had no idea. We did The Sound of Music, and he kept wanting the sky to be, when the curtains went up, he wanted the sky to be brighter. And what that meant finally, as I discovered, was redder. And so the sky went up, the drop went up, and it looked like the city was on fire. But to him, that looked great. And I was like, you know what? I wish you'd known you were colorblind 20 years ago, because I could have told you that looks like the whole city's on fire. The hills are alive, the hills are burning. So be very careful. Don't be scared to ask. A lot of people have difficulty seeing color. There is a psychological aspect to color. And as with all things psychological, some of these are true for everybody. Some may not be true for you. Again, you past associations. Let's say you had a clown in your second-year birthday party that was wearing a green outfit that jumped out and scared the bejesus out of you. and you hate green. I don't have any idea what the psychological nature of your history is, but for the most part, the little chart that I'm giving you here tends to be true. Reds, yellows, and oranges tend to be hot colors. Green, blues, and purples tend to be cool colors. Red tends to be passionate and exciting. Orange tends to be jovial. Yellow is cheerful. It also is, a lot of times yellow is fearful. If you're a coward, you can have that association with it as well. Green tends to be quieting, but it also tends to represent money. So people who are dressed in green, or if you have a green environment, that can say something about, if your daddy Warbucks, having a green house may suggest that you have money in the bank. Again, blue is very sober, very comforting. Purple tends to be very dignified, it's the color of royalty, and the reason for that is that purple is the hardest dye to find. It's the most expensive. The colors that make purple dye are just expensive things. And so back in the day when they were making clothes that they used dyes of various natural source dyes, red's very easy to find. Beets are really the closest thing to purple. And it's not really purple, it's more violet. But true rich purple is eggplant. Maybe you can get some from that. But they're very unique plants, and they're very hard to. The color doesn't stay very easily. A lot of colors, the dye will last forever for long periods of time. Purple tends to fade very quickly and very fast. And because of that, that tends to be the color of royalty. Because of that, it tends to be associated with very rich people and very expensive items. Again, white can be very cool. Neutral is a black, brown. Those are very neutral colors. Again, some people's favorite color is black. A lot of people's favorite color is black. Some people's favorite colors are white. I can't tell you what your favorite color is. All I can tell you is what colors tend to represent. And as a set designer, you don't want to fight too hard for a color choice that may say the wrong thing about somebody. I tend personally not to like yellow. I will shy away from it as much as I can. I just think it makes people look jaundiced, makes people look sick. It's just, to me, not a pleasing color, but that doesn't mean that occasionally it's not the right choice. So occasionally you have to, get yourself out of the way and say, is this the best color choice for what I'm about to do, for the show I'm doing, for the instance that's there? Again, directors have personalities and have choices as well. You have to ultimately satisfy the director in most situations with your color choices. One of the things about color choices is that there's the color choice you make, and then there's the color choice that the scenic artist painted. And oftentimes those can differ. And so it is typically, I would suggest, there's this company named Roscoe, which makes basic color palette, some primary colors, but they also have a good number of secondary and tertiary colors that are just in their stock. And I would suggest, if you're creating a color, it is probably best not to go to Lowe's and find those little chips that are 13,000 different things where they have to, drain each one and change the color by minutia. That tends not to work too well. My suggestion to you is you find Roscoe and either use one or two blended colors together and write down the recipe. And when you write down the recipe, and this is for your model, you put that color on your model, when you make that color, then that way you can send the formula to the scenic artist so they can use the same colors. Because even when you make a Xerox copy, the Xerox copy machine has an eye that sees a different color than the way it may have been printed online, or the original color wherever it was. So again, any time there's a next generation, there's a likelihood, not just a possibility, but a likelihood that next generation has altered the color slightly. And again, slight alterations, if you slightly alter it one time, and then you make a copy of that and slightly alter it again, and then send it by fax, and they slightly alter it there, the color you may want maybe 3 or 4 generations different from the color you started with. So just be very careful of that as you're creating your colors to send off for your set designs. Cool. All right. For your paint elevations, you just need to take the drafting that you gave me. Again, if you can come by and pick them up. They're in the desk outside my office. You can use the original, or I tried to take a picture of it. If the picture I sent of it didn't work too well, ask me and I'll send you another picture of it. But just print that picture off and just color it in. The matter of fact, the color that I sent the picture to you may help gradate the color of your set, is whatever. So on Thursday, that's all we're going to do that day. Just take a picture of your elevation and send it back to me, or bring it back in and leave it on the desk out there if I'm not here, or just give it to me if I'm here. Cody and I will be here all week videotaping. But that's the project that's due Thursday. Just so you know, the next generation is to take the other 2 walls, or 3 walls, or however many walls left. Again, this should have been your hardest wall because it was the largest wall in your set. So you want to take your draft the other 2 or 3 walls, color them in. Again, make a note of what colors you used on your paint elevation. If you're going to use the same paint elevations on the other 2 walls, color them in and then tape them all together, put them on a base, and that's your color model. You don't have to do a new theater because it already fit into the theater that you built for your model, for your white model. So your finished model is just the set itself. There's no actual theater that you have to build to it. So those are the 2 projects we have left on Lost in Yonkers. Then the final project is the exact same thing. You're going to design a set for any show other than Lost in Yonkers. Now, I'm going to put together a show, a video, 4 or 5 videos of one set wonders. I know Waiting for Godot is going to be one of them. Probably Miss Julie be one of them. Tartuffe will probably be one of them. Anyway, there will be videos that I will send you links to, so you can watch the video to understand the show. You're going to have to give me the little sheet that says what you think the concept is for your show, right? Go through the given circumstances, all those things we talked about with Lost in Yonkers. You'll fill out the answers for your new play, and then you need to give me a ground plan or a white model, right? You don't have to, if you want to draft the ground plan, then you don't have to do the white model. And then you need to give me an elevation, show me the color, or a finished model. If all you want to do is a finished model and answer the question, a finished model tells me everything. It tells me color, it tells me scale, it tells me everything. So if you just do those 2 things for your final project, you've done a great job. If you want to do a white model and then just have a color elevation, that tells me the color and it tells me how it fits, right? So you can do a sketch, right? So the world is your oyster now. You're the set designer for the show. You now know the possibilities for how a show is designed. It's up to you as a set designer as to how you want to work best with that. Cool. All right. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please email me. We'll do this once a week with the lecture part of the week. And again, you've got a test coming up at the end of the year in May. That'll be multiple choice questions and maybe a little essay on it. But we'll give you those information when we get there. Thank you very much. Have a great day.